Good morning. Thank you for bearing with us as things were a little bit messy as we got started. I am your moderator for the day. My name is Ashley Fick. I am the Civic Engagement Librarian for the library. We invite every legislator with constituents in Johnson County to participate at these. And then just some housekeeping before we get started. Please use the form in the chat to submit any questions that you want asked of the legislators today. We do our best to get to all of them. If we don't get to them, I send contact information at the end of each event, so you can follow up if you'd like to do so. This event also features closed captioning, so if that's a feature that you would like to take advantage of, we encourage you to do so. And then we're going to just get started with 3 minutes per legislator to introduce themselves, talk a little bit about what's going on in Topeka, and just give you a little bit of rundown of what's going on in their committees. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. I don't know if there's a legislator that wants to volunteer, or we can just go in order of who's on my screen. Does anyone feel strongly about getting started? No. Representative Johnson, would you like to start? You're number 1 on my screen, so.
Well, good morning. It is a pleasure to be here. I don't get to get out to Johnson County as much. I do reside on the Leavenworth County side of the 38th district, just a couple miles from the DeSoto border, which I take. The district also goes all the way down, includes Gardner Lake. Up until December 21st, I was a school teacher over here at Baser Linwood in government and criminal justice. And I also spent about 31 years in the criminal justice field in a variety of positions, the last few years in child abuse cases. And so I bring a couple of those things into the legislature. I'm a freshman and I am finding myself in a graduate study class, learning all the little ins and outs. It's amazing to me the volume of reading that's necessary. And I'm afraid at times I find myself not knowing what's really going to happen in the next few minutes, and then I have to talk to someone. But it's been a pleasure to serve, and we have some wonderful people in Topeka. I really sense that they care about the people they vote, that they're working for the voters, and that's been good for me. Thank you.
Right, if there's not another volunteer, Senator Representative Day, you're next in line.
Okay, thank you so much. And so I represent House District 48, which is in South Overland Park. The boundaries are 119th Street to 151st, Schweitzer over to Antioch, and then bumps out to Metcalf a little bit. So it's a very compact, small square, but full of wonderful voters. We had great turnout in 2020 here. I was appointed to replace Dr. David Benson, who had won his election in 2018. And then when the COVID pandemic hit, he decided that it was time for him to move. So he moved away, and I was asked to step in, and I was just absolutely honored to do so. And then I ran for re-election with just a 4-month-long campaign and managed to win by 62 votes. And Dr. Benson had only won by a little bit over 70 votes. And this is where it comes in so important for folks to be reminded that every vote matters in these elections. I am like Representative Johnson, even though I'm not technically a freshman to say, you know, like that, but I was a freshman. This was the first time I've done a full session. And I see it the same way. It was kind of like going to college. We're going to our committees, and I see those as being kind of like classes, and I learned a lot, but I also felt like the committees that I wound up being assigned to, which were taxation, financial institutions, and rural development, as well as corrections and juvenile justice, were just absolutely fantastic committees for me to be able to give my perspective on. So it was a good time. The committee work was the first couple of months, and while we did some floor work, these last couple of weeks have been floor heavy, where we were in the chamber and doing a lot of voting. So this week in particular, this is a good week for folks to be on this legislative coffee. We probably have a lot of information for you, so I'll let us get to it. I'm so grateful to be here. I'm so grateful that Representative Johnson is joining us, and to have Representative Clayton and Stogsdill and Senator Holscher with us. It really is. We're a great group of of seasoned representatives who are going to be able to help us out with filling in the blanks. Thank you so much for having us. I really love these events.
Representative Clayton, would you like to go next?
Yes, I would be happy to. Good morning, everyone. And I'll echo Representative Dave's sentiments. It's very nice to see everyone on here, especially Representative Johnson. We don't sit on the same side of the aisle and we're not in any of the same committees, but I see you working hard and I appreciate the work that all of you are doing for your constituents. My committees, or rather I'll start with my district boundaries. I represent the 19th district, which means absolutely nothing to any of you, but my boundaries are from Metcalf to State Line, mostly 83rd to mostly 99th. But if you live in Mission Farms near Rye and Tavern at Mission Farms, I'm your representative. And if you live in Avenue 80 and Avenue 81 in that newly developed area of downtown Overland Park on the east side of Metcalf, I'm also your representative. And so my committees are, I start the day with Federal and State Affairs, which is a very controversial committee that usually handles a lot of our gun legislation, gambling, medicinal cannabis. And then I move on to the business sector where I am the ranking minority member on the Commerce and Labor and Economic Development Committee. And I close up the day with some logic and numbers on taxation where I get to serve with Representatives Stogsdill and Day. I'm also the House Minority Whip, and so part of that role is getting to know the caucus, understanding where we are on issues, and sometimes working with my colleagues across the aisle to see what types of legislation we agree on. I found myself working with moderate Republicans and also with very conservative Republicans to get some legislation out of committee and to get some legislation passed. In addition to that, I serve on the Rules and Journal Committee. So if any of you are real legislative wonks and you're watching our proceedings, every once in a while, germaneness or a breach in the rules will be challenged, which warrants a meeting of the Rules Committee. And so that is a group where we go back, we work things out, and we determine whether something is within our rules or whether an amendment is pertinent to the underlying bill. It has been a very busy, constant breakneck speed session, and we are still very much in the middle of it. A lot of things still have as of yet to be resolved when we return from our 3-week break, which actually started yesterday evening. And I look forward to hearing your questions. Thank you for having me this morning.
Okay, Senator Holscher, you're next on my list if you'd like to go.
Certainly. Thank you so much. Good morning. Thank you for doing this once again. I always enjoy these updates and being able to see constituents and other people across Kansas. Maybe someday we'll see you in person again, but I am great and so appreciative of this format and still being able to connect with people. I'm Senator Cindy Holscher. My district that I cover is District 8. Which goes from 91st Street down to 135th, and then from Flum to Metcalf. It is all Overland Park area. Previously, I was a representative for District 16, which covered that area, plus a little bit of Lenexa. So I do miss my Lenexa section, but still hold it all very dear and try to make sure I'm working to represent the people in that entire area. It's been an interesting session. As mentioned, I started as a representative, came in at the same time as Representative Stogsdill, I believe, worked with Stephanie previously, and got to work with Jennifer just a little bit. So miss my friends on the other side. And Timothy, I don't even know if I formally have met you yet, but it's good to see you. So it's interesting. I tell people this, sometimes people will ask me, well, have you seen so-and-so or talked to them? And honestly, if you're in the House, the Senate could be like a totally different planet. You may not see each other the entire session, which seems kind of odd in a way. But it's, each chamber is kept very, very busy the entire time we're there. This has been, like I said, a very interesting session with a lot of bills that were controversial coming out. My particular committees that I work on are Commerce, Public Health, and Insurance. And some good bills came forward, especially out of Commerce. We have a good committee there with good working relationships. Public Health saw some very concerning bills coming forward. Insurance, not so much, but I'm sure we'll get in depth a little bit more on some of those specifics coming forward. But again, thank you so much for having me, and it's great to see all of you.
Representative Stogsdill, feel free to close us out.
Thank you. It's really good to be here this morning, and it's nice to see everyone who's attending this morning, or at least your names on the screen. And I'm certainly hoping that it won't be too far into the future before we can all get together in the same room again. This is nice, but having the opportunity to be in the same room and talk to people one-on-one and so on like that, it's what we would all prefer, obviously. I'm Jerry Stogsdill. I'm serving my third term in the Kansas House of Representatives, and my district is District 21. It runs from 67th Street to 83rd and Metcalf to State Line. So it takes up most of Prairie Village and parts of Leawood, Overland Park, and Mission Hills. So my three committees that I serve on, I start my morning on the Water Committee. And actually, it's a special 2-year committee, and we are looking at all of the situations that impact water in Kansas. And I thought, well, this is going to be kind of a little, I don't know whether it's going to be the greatest committee to work on, but it has been fascinating. And it is an extremely important committee because water is going to be a huge issue in Kansas over the next few years. And most of this year has been learning about water and the organizations that manage it and so on like that. And next year is when we actually put the plan together and develop legislation to implement some of those plans. So that's my first committee. My second committee is I'm ranking Democrat on the Education Committee. And as you can imagine, that is an interesting committee, and we have had some very interesting issues come out of education this year. And I'm sure there will probably be some questions about that. And my third committee is taxation. And again, like Stephanie said, it's a real pleasure to serve with Jennifer and Stephanie on that committee. And I'm just glad to be here this morning. And we're on the first part of a 3-week break. I'm kind of looking forward to that a little bit. But as Stephanie said, we've got a lot of important issues to deal with still when we get back to Topeka in early part of May. So looking forward to your questions, and thank you for being here this morning.
We'll go ahead and get into our first question. We have 3 minutes per legislator to answer each of these questions. Are you in favor of a nonpartisan independent redistricting commission? Why or why not?
I don't know who wants to jump in on this. Yes, absolutely. It was one of the things that that I mentioned throughout my campaign, because 2020 was a census year. We will have redistricting happening hopefully before 2022. But things got pushed out a little bit because of COVID. However, the work is going to be fast and furious. We do not have an independent commission in our state right now. I believe the legislature is the one, and who they do the work to do the redistricting. And in the past, that has led to some court interaction on that, and that happens across a lot of states. That's why I think independent commissions are really important if we can put them into place. I don't know that there's a plan to do so still, but I would certainly be in favor of pushing for that. Thank you.
I'll echo that. Yes, very much in favor of redistricting being done that way. And I think, part of that goes back to the fact that, what was it, over a year ago, when former Senate President Susan Wagle said that, she wanted to make sure that lines could be drawn to be, basically to favor her party, her candidates, in such a way to make it harder for other candidates to win. So I think what that put out there, that kind of sent the message that, okay, we need a nonpartisan group to do this, because, why wouldn't you want to draw your district to benefit yourself? So having it in the hand of legislators doesn't really seem to make the most sense to most people, and it doesn't to me either. So I would really, really prefer to see a nonpartisan group do that.
I went ahead and raised my hand. I also support a nonpartisan redistricting commission. I think that there are a lot of different ways that we can do this, because just because we say something is nonpartisan doesn't mean that it actually is. We've got a lot of people talk about states that have the gold standards. Standards for that. I really like the Ohio model. Some people tend to favor Iowa's, but again, I think that the less political it is, the better. But then again, sometimes that road to hell is paved with those good intentions. I am a member of the redistricting committee on the House side. And so I think one of the important things here is to follow those rules that we need to follow, make sure that districts are representing communities of interest, and that there are, that no bias is really put forth. And so that's going to be a lot of, morality, moral heavy lifting, honestly, when you think about it. It's especially important for Johnson County because our population, although we don't have the official census numbers, anyone who lives here has seen the way that our population has exploded in just the past 10 years. I know that my district's population has gone up significantly because of all of the new redeveloping. And so I know that a lot of our districts will shrink in geographical size as our population becomes more dense. And so when we look at that, especially redistricting plays a major important role in Johnson County and how those districts are going to look. But again, just trying to conduct ourselves with the least amount of bias and understanding that voting, district lines, and those voting rights are really sacred principles on which our country is founded. And so as long as we keep that mindset and keep our morality about us as we conduct ourselves, a nonpartisan commission would have been better, but we don't have that. You guys are stuck with us drawing these lines. And so it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we are doing this in the best way possible.
Yeah, I'd like to just echo what Stephanie said. And this is going to be an especially interesting and important redistricting time because, and I'll give you a little background on why. 2 summers ago, during the interim, I attended along with 4 or 5 other of my colleagues from here in Johnson County. We went out to Lindsborg, Kansas to attend a meeting called Meet in the Middle. And it was basically about rural revitalization out there. And I thought that there ought to be some urban legislators that come out and learn more about that because it's obviously, they represent an important part of our economy and so on like that. And they had a professor from Kansas State who gave a presentation out there. And this guy is world known as a demographer and an expert in population shifts and so on. And he gave a presentation on population shifts in Kansas. And he pointed out that when this census comes out, Kansas will officially be an urban state. And that's the first time in the history of Kansas that has happened. And so redistricting with those urban areas and so on, it's going to actually take away some of the, or it's going to expand some of the districts out west, and it's going to give us more districts here, particularly in the northeast part of Kansas and down around Sedgwick County and so on. So this is going to be a critical redistricting effort this year. And I'm much in favor of a totally neutral organization coming in and doing the redistricting. We should take as much of the politics out of this as possible, in my opinion, because by doing that, I think it helps all of our constituents be assured that these districts are done fairly and can represent the best interests of our constituents, and that's the bottom line right there. So it'll be interesting to see how it goes, and we'll hope for the best here. But I have a feeling it may end up. I believe in 2010 it ended up in the courts, and it may end up there again. I hope not, but if we can't get it done, I think maybe an independent organization to come in and do it is the way to go.
Well, that leaves me. Let's see, I have a district that's 2-1 Republican over Democrats. Sure, I want to get, the whole concept of redistricting has always been an issue in the United States. One of my big concerns is that they're holding back the census results. We should already have those. and I think they're being held for whatever reason, and that worries me. I do know that my district is going to change just because of the growth patterns that we just talked about. The city of Bayshore has a housing boom, so I probably will lose some of my district to the south in Johnson County. I just understand that's part of the process, but I'm also not afraid of an impartial committee. I easily would be happy going into the Bonner Springs. I have a Bonner Springs mailing address, but I live about a mile into Leavenworth County. I grew up in Wyandotte County. I'd be very happy back there with some precincts. Doesn't bother me at all. But it is going to be a challenge. And I personally, I do think it will end up in the courts. That's just my experience in the study of this. And maybe that's the best thing. Let the courts break it up so that we won't have the arguments between the two parties. So my thoughts.
And just as a side note, the league would like to invite anyone that wants to take part in raising awareness and advocating for fair maps in Kansas during the league's people-powered Fair Maps Week of Action. I got that right, and my tongue didn't twist on it, although it twisted as I was saying I got it right. And you can learn more at lwvk.org. We're going to post a link in the chat as well. So that leads us to our next question. When the legislature returns to Topeka on May 3rd, what happens next, and what legislation will be addressed at that time?
Well, when we return, usually that time is, it's referred to as veto session. Now, especially when Stogsdill and Holscher first started, it was anything but. We usually left everything to the very last minute. But let's see. So both chambers have already considered at least one budget of a sort, although the Senate did reject a pretty significant portion of our budget when they voted down an education policy bill that was tied to appropriations. And so I think a lot of legislators have some heartburn about that. So I think we will be reworking those portions of our budget to see the way that that works out. And then, of course, it's called the veto session for a reason, right? We will see what the governor does, and if she does choose to veto either portions of the budget, which is within her purview, she can do line items there, or entire pieces of legislation. We passed quite a bit of things in these past couple of days in both chambers. And so if she does veto that, then that gives our collective legislative bodies the opportunity to consider either overriding those vetoes or letting those vetoes stand. We could also take that vote and end up sustaining vetoes. And so sort of that last bit of negotiation as we come to the very end of the session. But so that's kind of what we're looking at. So a lot of it is the ball is very much in the governor's court. We've sent a lot of stuff downstairs from the third floor where our chambers are to the second floor where her offices are. And it remains to be seen some of the things that we will end up taking up for consideration when we reconvene in May.
I'll jump in. It'll be interesting to see what veto session is like in the Senate this year. We do have new leadership in terms of the Senate president. Obviously, you probably saw the news yesterday. The Senate Majority Leader was removed from his position. And to kind of preface all of that, this past week in session normally would have been used as a time to review what we call the conference committee reports, basically when a few members of the House and a few members of the Senate get together and kind of work on some bills where there were differences. So that happened, but additionally, we were back on GO, general orders. Normally, you don't have general orders during that time period. And some of those bills that we heard this week were very concerning bills. A lot of things that came through kind of at the last minute, as well as some other things that had kind of been sitting there that got put on agenda for this past week. So like I said, it'll be kind of interesting to see what veto session looks like under this new leadership. And again, based upon what the governor may veto and what the chamber may try to override. There is a supermajority in both chambers as far as the Republican Party. So I'm sure they will use some strategy in determining which bills they want to bring back and try to override But like I said, there are some kind of questions as far as what that session is going to look like in terms of actual veto session or other business.
I might add, I think Cindy and Stephanie covered things pretty well there. And Cindy's right. There is a Republican supermajority in both the House and the Senate. But the good news, we had several controversial bills come through the House this year. And the votes on those bills did not reflect a supermajority. So I think some of these bills that are going to be coming back to us from the governor, it's not necessarily a done deal that because the Republicans have a supermajority in the House that they will be able to override the governor's vetoes. We've had a controversial gun bill. We've had some controversial education bills, and those bills did not pass with a veto-proof majority. So it'll be interesting to see what the governor decides to veto and what issues are returned to us in the House. And I think it's going to be a very interesting veto session.
For me, of course, it's all going to be new. And I haven't seen this, but I will tell you this last 2 weeks as I've watched the conference committees, I understood from a government standpoint what a conference committee was, but I did not understand what really happened in there. As I watched the bills get gutted and then something else put in, I worked very hard on the K through 12 education committee. And then all of a sudden at the very end, basically we had 4 major bills all in one, asking people to vote on it. And how do you explain that to your constituents? I like this part, I like this part, I like this part. And I'm not crazy about this one, but I got to vote on it all together. Is that poison pill or something that I'm learning my terms? That was hard to try to figure out how I could explain. I felt very good about the amount of money that we were putting into the education generally, but some of the other issues there are very challenging. So I do expect a real battle on those. On the other hand, I was very fortunate in one of the conference committees. My first bill ever on the veterans home got added to. Susan Estes brought a bill, and I really feel like we helped some people in criminal justice and public safety along with our military people. And that's already good to go. And I've already been told it's going to get signed by the governor. And to me, that is the part. I know Senator Pittman helped us on that, probably saved our bacon. There is some bipartisanship going on in there. Not always, and I know I'm a Republican and we have the majority, but I really think there's a lot of us that are looking to get things done for our voters. Thank you.
And I think everybody's said everything very well so far. I'm not sure if everyone who's on this in this meeting understands what. So we are off for 3 weeks, during which time I'll continue to receive. We all receive emails from our constituents. That you can still send emails to us and let us know what your thoughts are on the remaining legislation that's coming up. What's happening with the bills that have been sent to the governor. And then we'll be back in May, at the beginning of May. And as I understand it, sine die, I think is it on the 26th was what we were told, right? So we'll have a couple of weeks there to discuss these bills and see, and who knows, maybe something will, I don't know, can we have general orders again? We might have GO, right? So it's, again, this, like Representative Johnson, this is something that I'm learning as I go as well. And I agree. I think that one of the difficult things about being a legislator, being a new legislator, and being a seasoned legislator is this fact that you get good things rolled up with the bad, and you have to choose which way you're going to go on it based on just how bad that bad is to you and to your district, and what you're hearing from folks in your district or beyond to let you know how it would impact them. So it's very important that we all keep an open mind. The supermajority is impactful. I honestly think sometimes we have caucus meetings before we go onto the floor to vote, and there's just a handful of us really compared to the supermajority. And I wonder how hard it is to have that meeting. There's twice as many of them as there are of us. And how it might be hard to have your voice heard in that sort of situation. And I certainly respect, and as Jerry mentioned too, Representative Johnson has shared some thoughts at the well that have been really impactful and important for me to hear as a former teacher, and just a all around great legislator. So that's my take on it. I just want everybody to remember that we're going to have those couple of weeks off here, but still feel free to reach out to us about legislation if you have thoughts on it.
We actually have gotten quite a few questions about the partisan divide. So here are two that kind of sum up what we've been seeing. Today, we have both Republicans and Democratic legislators, so they can each address this question. Is there any legislation you had hoped that would pass this year and did not make it through the process? What was the legislation and why did it matter to you? How did it get stalled? And then we have a second one. This forum appears to be heavily Democrat oriented. Why aren't you doing something for us Republicans? And to the legislators, why are you one-sided in your legislation endeavors?
I guess I'd be happy to speak to the partisan divide because I spent 6 years in the legislature as a Republican and am now in my third year serving as a Democrat. So first things first, I think that a lot of times, I think first of all, as to where there are, why there are more Democrats in this particular forum than Republicans, I think a lot of this, they send out a list of dates to us and then we all kind of pick. So I think that there might be other dates where you have more Republican legislators than Democrats. But I do think it's important to, although, yes, obviously this is a two-party system under which we serve, but I think ultimately the most important thing for us to do as legislators is to listen to everyone, regardless of what side of the aisle our constituents are on. And of course, we all represent a pretty healthy amount of independents in some of our districts as well. I think that one of the things that we should always remember is, especially in the House, we have a voting board where it lights up green or red for whether we're voting yes or no. And I mean, I think about 90% of the time, Representative Johnson and I are voting on the same way, regardless of our parties, because there are lots of things that we agree on. And so I think focusing from that standpoint and moving from where we can work together. And then as we get closer to the end of this legislative process, the end of our legislative calendar, when we come back for veto session, it really is about hammering out those differences. But yeah, so having served in both capacities as a Republican and as a Democrat, people ask me a lot about the differences, but honestly, I'm struck by the similarities in the ways in which we conduct ourselves. So I can say for, basically every member of the Johnson County delegation, even though they're not all on here, that we really are looking at this from a standpoint of how do we do good and how do we get our constitutional duty accomplished, which is to present you all with a balanced budget, because that is our chief role, and that's making sure that we are appropriating the funds correctly.
I'll jump in. A lot of people don't realize, but, I don't know what it is, 90% of the bills that we vote on, are pretty close to unanimous as far as, Republicans and Democrats voting on things. The ones that get the main attention, though, are, of course, Medicaid expansion, value them both, the things that you see more in the press where there are bigger differences on. I will say, whenever I first entered the House chamber, right up front early on, a lot of my time was spent just making establishing relationships with people in my party as well as across the aisle. Same thing now in the Senate. And I have strong relationships on both sides of the aisle. So there's some great people I serve with, some people I really enjoy being around. And, hopefully that helps going forward and moving some legislation. I will tell you, one of the things that is very notable about this session, I'm sure it happened in the House too, because of COVID and the timing from last year hitting in March, there was a lot of unfinished business. So we were very busy early on addressing some of the bills, and it kind of got to be a little bit of a broken record. We get ready to hear a bill and it's like, this one is from last year when COVID hit, and stop session. So we had several bills that were picked up from last session that were basically reheard and then move forward. So a lot of makeup work, catch up work in that regard, and then some new bills that came forward. I had several bills that didn't get a hearing, partly because of that logjam, but also just because, maybe it wasn't palatable to the particular chair of a committee. One of those bills deals actually with the Albers case here in Johnson County in regard to police records. It's an important bill that allows some transparency in regard to use of excessive force and ensuring that that there's some accountability with law enforcement. And interestingly, one of the supporters of this type of initiative is the chairperson of the Republican Party. So, we have a good relationship. And so hopefully going forward, we'll be able to work more on that as well. Another bill that I had started with last year is in regard to statute of limitations in regard to sexual assaults in civil cases. That bill got a hearing last year, was viewed quite favorably, and then was referred to the Judiciary Council to review over the interim. So we have some recommendations on it. It was not picked up for a hearing, but it's a very important bill. I was able to do some work behind the scenes in regard to some of the work that needs to be done for victims of sexual assault. So some things, sometimes some good changes can happen that doesn't require legislation. So I'm always trying to do that type of work. But hopefully next year, some of these important issues can come back and we can move them forward.
For me, again, this is all new, but one of the bills that I think maybe is the most important one that I saw out was the Adrian's law or bill. Louis Ruiz out of KCK did a marvelous job of getting that introduced. I didn't get to follow it because it wasn't on my committees, and we got it through. The House went well, yet it wasn't getting called up, and I didn't. That's hard for me to understand because I think this is one of the most critical bills that we saw in the House, and then it came up in conference committee. And I honestly, as of this morning, I'm not sure where it's at. If anybody does, tell me, because that bill needs to be finished and sent to the governor. And I'm having trouble tracking things that got put into these conference committees or moved around. And I'm bottom of the totem pole, so I don't know what leadership's going to call up. I don't go into those meetings. But if I was to ask for one bill that I want to see come up, it would be that bill. Thank you.
I've got a list that I would like to see come up. And but I think the number one thing to me, and it's just unconscionable that we have not passed Medicaid expansion, especially in a year like we've had with this pandemic and everything. And we have tens of thousands of Kansans who basically don't have any health care insurance, and in reality that leaves them without health care in a lot of cases. And we brought it up again this year, and it was shot down again this year, and we didn't even get a committee hearing on it. We had to bring it up as an amendment. And over the last several years, we have sent billions of Kansas tax dollars to Washington, D.C., which are then redistributed for healthcare costs to all of the other states who have passed Medicaid expansion. So, these states ought to be sending us thank you notes for paying for part of their healthcare. And everybody said, they said we can't afford it. And that's just not the case, because we are affording it. Only it's all of us, all of our constituents and everyone who are paying the price of that. Because we're turning down hundreds of millions of dollars in federal funds to come back to Kansas, and those 150,000 or so Kansans who have no health insurance, if you've got a sick child or a sick wife or a husband or something like that, and you have to get them help, you're going to take them to an emergency room, and emergency rooms cannot turn people away, so they have to treat them, and that the hospitals eat that cost. Well, guess who ends up paying for that? We all do, through higher hospital costs and higher insurance costs. So Kansans can either pay for it out of their own wallets, or they can get that money back from the federal government to pay 95% of those costs in Medicaid, for Medicaid expansion. I think, again, I just think it's unconscionable, and I think that is been the number one irritant for me for my 5 years in the legislature, and we've had an opportunity to pass it every year, and we still haven't done it. So that's my bill.
And just speaking from my own perspective on the bipartisanship or the party line issue, I too was a Republican until 2016. I registered as one when I was 18. So for the majority of my life, I was a voting Republican, although I tended to vote more for the candidate than the letter next to their name. Personally, it was something that my parents taught me, but and so it's, you have to do your research. It's easier to do the research these days than it was back in the 90s when I first started voting. But I have to say, coming into the legislature and seeing how things work in these committees, taxation committee is one of the largest committees that I'm on. And I feel like the majority of the stuff that we're putting through the legislation that we're working through on that committee is bipartisanly received. There's very few things that we tend to disagree on and vote against the Republicans on in that. And Jerry might have a different perspective on that from me, but I have a really good time in that committee. But juvenile justice, the corrections and juvenile justice was by far my most busy committee, believe it or not. It's a smaller committee. I am one of the non-lawyers on that committee. And so I bring a very layperson perspective to it. And I was just so impressed by the work that we were doing that followed up on what the State Sentencing Commission and the Kansas Criminal Justice Reform Commissions were doing for the last couple of years to try to make sure that our justice system in Kansas is more fairly applied, as well as the statutes are helpful to the judges, to the lawyers that are working on making sure that people are being sentenced fairly. And making sure that we get through that. So we did a lot of work and passed a lot of legislation through. I was one of the few freshmen who carried a bill both for juvenile justice as well as financial institutions. I'm looking forward to possibly carrying a taxation bill here during the veto session. And it's just an honor to be able to be trusted with that process to carry a bill on the floor, which as a Democrat, I think is unusual to have a freshman Democrat, no less, to carry those bills. And I really think that speaks to the respect that we have for each other in the legislature. And while my vote win was very narrow, I have to respect the fact that my district is interesting in that regard with the layout. I do have to remember that, the reason why I ran is why people voted for me. So, and I stand for very specific things. That's where I come from on my perspective. So appreciate it.
All right. This one is directed to Representative Day, but anyone that wants to speak to it is certainly welcome. Representative Day, thank you for serving on the Juvenile Justice Committee. What recommendations do you have for the diversion programs and redemption?
Oh gosh, that's a very specific question. And again, as the layperson on the committee, I'm not sure that I've done a whole lot of research on that. So it sounds like juvenile justice has gotten the system in our state has gotten really tidied up over the last few years, and we have way fewer juveniles in our juvenile detention system than we did just a couple of years ago. I think we're down to just like 150 kids that are being held. So I'll look into that some more. I appreciate the question, but I can't speak to it specifically at this point in time. It didn't come up a whole lot. The work that we did was a majority for adult justice and corrections in that committee.
It looks like nobody else wants to speak to it. So, but the league also does have a upcoming program on Saturday, May 1st, to learn about alternatives to the incarceration of youth in a panel discussion about how to hold youth accountable.
That'd be great. It looked like Rep. Johnson might have something to say actually.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, I just jumped in there. One of the programs that state of Kansas started, I guess I'm gonna say 20 plus years ago, community corrections programs, where you're keeping people in their homes. It's probably one of those concepts we need to expand. And I'm not on that committee because I asked specifically for education and the children and seniors. But I see that as a way in which we keep people at home, keeping them in their programs that they need. If the younger kids, they need to be in school, a real school, not in a juvenile justice education program, because I've watched those and they don't work. We've got to get them back in the community. And that's where I hope that we will continue to fund. I don't know, maybe Representative Day knows. I don't follow it. I haven't had time. But are we funding that properly? You know, for the kids, for the community programming, because that's where they belong, or at least that's my opinion, where they belong, as opposed to in jail. All they learn to do there is to be a better crook.
Giving an extra long time just in case, since I jumped in too early. So I did post the information about the league's upcoming program in the chat. Our next question: legislation that would have expanded voucher programs in Kansas failed yesterday, but barely. I'm worried about continued legislative efforts to divert public dollars to private schools. Do you expect further action on this issue in the current session? If not, do you expect it next year? What can concerned citizens do at this point?
I'll just jump in. One thing you learn about Topeka, bad bills never die. The topic of vouchers comes back every session, and sometimes in a different form. Sometimes it's packaged a little differently. Sometimes it has a different name, but it keeps coming back. Biggest thing that you as constituents, as voters can do, keep putting pressure on people. And put pressure on your direct legislators, but also the committee members. And sometimes I think that people don't realize that, it's appropriate to email committee members who are serving on education, those particular committees, because sometimes you're talking about a pretty small group that's deciding to move forward a bill that impacts the entire state. So of course your voice is important to hear in that situation. But, like I said, bad bills never die. So good chance we'll see another form coming up. If not this session, guess what? Next session, I'm sure there will be another version of it. But, again, the important point is let your legislators know you're watching. It's harder for a legislator to vote for a bad bill like this Frankenstein bill that we had if they know people are watching.
Yeah, I might add on that you have to really watch for the terminology they use too. They never use the word voucher. It's scholarships, that sort of thing. And they make it sound better than it actually is, but you get right down to it, it's voucher systems. And vouchers do nothing but take public tax money and give it to private schools. And we have some very good private schools. I have a couple of good private schools right here in my district and so on. And to be quite frank, I've never heard a word from them as far as this issue goes. That does not seem to be a big thing with them. But the fact is that, these private schools and so on, they don't have to accept every child. They can cherry pick kids that come into that system. So I have never have supported vouchers, never will support vouchers. My position is totally clear: public money for public schools. So that is an issue, though, that does keep rearing its ugly head every session, and they come at it from about half a dozen different ways. So we really have to pay attention to it. And again, it's part of this whole thing too, which I think ought to be illegal, is bundling bills. That they will stick that in with good legislation for education and so on like that, and then you're forced to vote on, whether you're going to have vote for the 4 good parts and just, hold your nose for the bad part of it. And I think that's just bad government. That's bad process. We have plenty of time during a legislative session to deal with each issue individually. And the 5 years that I've been up there, I've seen it every year. At the end of the year, the groups that want the bad legislation passed, they stick them in other bills. They bundle these bills, and then we're forced to either take it all along with the good, along with the bad, or vote against the whole thing. And I think that's a terrible way to legislate. And I think this is an issue maybe that the League of Women Voters should really take a good look at, because as I say, we have plenty of time to deal with those issues on an individual basis, and we don't. So.
Yeah,
I'll
go
let
ahead.
Oh, no,
Thank you.
no, Representative Johnson, I think in the interest of bipartisanship, I'll go ahead and have you go first. Plus, you were on the K-12 committee, so.
Yes, I was. And I want to tell you, I really believe the K through 12 is one of the finest group of people I've ever worked with, both sides. It's an interesting committee, and of course, Representative Wynn comes to us from Kansas City, Kansas, and often that district, along with the Wichita districts, bear the brunt of a lot of comments. And so I respect that part. Coming from the area, I lived for much of my life in the area that Representative Wynn now represents. But I will tell you, one of the issues on the tuition credits, it's different than the educational funds. That was a bill all by itself. It was very limited, less than, what was it, 0.2% of all students would even be eligible for this. And as I studied it, the Welborn School is right across the street from Christ the King Catholic School. And the failure rate and the achievement level at Welborn is abysmal. And living out there, I could not let my own kids go there. And I was fortunate, so they went to Christ the King, did very well. And I see that money coming from private sources. People donate scholarships. It's not state money. And those kids have to have had a failure rate. And I saw that as separate. In fact, during the hearing, it was really heartbreaking to me, because the gentleman spoke in Spanish, and I listened to what he had to say about wanting his 2 boys to be able to go to Christ the King. And I thought, he didn't have the money to do what I did. And I worked an extra job so my kids could go. So I strongly support that part of our educational bill. Secondly, I've talked with Mark Tallman, and I find him to be a gentleman when it comes to negotiations on behalf of the School Boards Association. Okay. We were getting the money that is necessary to fund under Gannon and other issues. I think we were going to get the money for them, which leaves a couple other issues that were in the bill. And how do I break those up to talk to people and explain to them? But I do sense there is a commitment. I'll just share, as a Republican, it's going to come back up when we go. It's coming back before we leave. I'm sure of that. And maybe we'll be able to sort that out and let people speak for those things, because I'm committed to education. That's for everybody, not just public schools. That's every school. And in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to get a chance to be a substitute teacher out at Bethany Lutheran School in Johnson County. So I get to go back in the classroom. That's just my thoughts. Thanks.
Bethany Lutheran is in my district. It's just a little bit to the north of my house. So, but okay, so to go back to the education bill, it is absolutely going to come back. When that bill was defeated in the Senate, I thought, oh boy, that completely changes the game. I had originally thought that we might have a very short veto session, but we're not going to have a short veto session anymore, because that bill will need to be reworked, and obviously it will look different, because some things will need to be changed if they are going to get it past both chambers, since it failed in the Senate. Now, as far as I am concerned, I think one of the big problems with that is that we run into major issues when you are bundling policy with appropriations. And so I feel like we should just make those basic, appropriations to our education budget and keep that clean of any sort of real philosophical ideas about how we educate our students. But that's just, I was going to say that's just me. That's obviously not just me, but obviously the powers that be prefer to sort of bundle those things together. And of course, it's you take the good, you take the bad, you take them both, and there you have the legislation that we end up dealing with, right? So we see this with our taxation policy as well. There was a tax bill that I was not particularly fond of that had some really wonderful elements in it, most notably allowing people to itemize their deductions, which most Kansans don't do. But boy, a lot of people who live in the 19th district sure do like to make itemized deductions. And so it is kind of frustrating to see that going through. Obviously, it's a mechanism on behalf of leadership in order to get something passed through. But I think bottom line, that is going to end up, being a bit of a fight. And again, we have to see the types of reactions that we get from the second floor, because again, that's the beauty of having this balance where you've got two parties, two chambers, you've got those three branches of government. It really is threading the needle to get legislation through. But I guess, long story long, I do not support having that type of education policy bundled with our appropriations. I prefer a clean appropriations bill and will probably only support a clean appropriations bill.
I'm not sure if there's time for me to chat. I don't know how long we're going to be doing this. I just my quick 2 cents on this. I am childless by choice, but it is very important as a member of society that all of our children are well educated, so that we can continue to have a functioning and great capitalist system that helps everybody keep moving. And just being a product of both public and private schools throughout my life, and being married to a man who was forced to go to a public school that was eventually closed because it was so terrible what it did. He's from Indiana, so completely different system of schools there, but his brothers all had the benefit of going to a private school instead. And he was the oldest in the family and just had that difficulty. And he also has ADD and severe dyslexia, was diagnosed early on in life, and really just had to struggle through with his public education. And I will tell you that writing, spelling, it's still even in our 40s a challenge for him. And I think he would have benefited from a public education that was well funded, that had paras that were paid properly, that the teachers were paid well, and were able to maybe further their education as they continue to help teach people like my husband, and make sure that he had the best education possible going forward. I think honestly the best education he had in his life was going through Johnson County Community College, where they have a great system in place to help people in his position who need specialized attention from teachers and outside of the classroom, sometimes extra attention that he needs to do for himself. It's all about advocating for himself in that case. And had a scholarship been available for him through the private education system in Indiana, maybe that's something he could have taken advantage of. But I just don't know that tax dollars being appropriated to that is the best way to do it. I think that that you need to deal with private funding through fundraising and just philanthropy in general. And I don't know that there's a challenge to our private schools in Kansas in that regard. I don't know how much money they have. I sure would love to see how much money they have on hand to be able to pay for scholarships and to help more kids out. Is it sitting there? Possibly. Pepperdine University, I graduated from, billions of, they have so much money coming in that they could be giving and helping with scholarships. And in fact, a lot of their student body is funded through that. So we just need to make sure that schools have that opportunity to use that money to put towards scholarships instead of having to rely on tax dollars, in my opinion. Thank you.
And we are unfortunately out of time and won't have time to answer any more questions. However, if you didn't get your question asked and you really want to follow up, all of their contact information I'm going to send out in an email now. We always encourage you to do so. Follow up, please. They want to hear from you. That's why they're here today. And so I just want to thank our legislators one last time. Thank you for being here on a Saturday morning, giving up your time. And thank you to all of our attendees. You also gave up your Saturday morning. We appreciate it. We think it's important. Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone.